are seeing in the news lately. In fact, they won't even oftentimes let you know if you have been hacked after the fact. So what we wanted to do was create a tool that engineers can use every day as a part of your toolbox to fully understand the configuration state of your cloud infrastructure environment, be that Azure or AWS. Fugue surveys that your cloud environment, gets back all the information from the cloud provider about those resources you have running and how they're configured, every individual configuration attribute of those resources, and then enables you to quickly validate those resources and that environment against a number of out-of-the-box policy frameworks such as CIS and NIST and GDPR, as well as your own custom policies. And it provides engineers with valuable information that they can use to bring those resources into compliance. Fugue has a number of additional tools for engineers to make their jobs easier, such as an API and a CLI, to begin baking cloud security and compliance at every stage of the software development lifecycle. And one of the things we love about Fugue is it's super easy to get up and running. And here with us to walk through just how easy that is our senior solutions architect, Ricardo Green. Ricardo, why don't you take it away and show everybody how quick they can get up and running.
Awesome, Drew. Thanks a lot. And again, everybody, thank you for taking the time this afternoon to spend a couple minutes with us getting your Fugue environment set up in Microsoft Azure. So for an agenda today, we're really going to be, we're going to go through this fairly quickly. As we say, it's spending about 15 minutes with us. We can get up and running. So we're going to define our first Fugue environment. We will go over the Fugue dashboard. So give you an administrative overview of the dashboard. When we do define that environment, upon our first scan, we will generate an infrastructure visualization diagram. We will check the results of validation of our environment against CIS benchmarks, and then we'll talk a little bit about baselining. So what baselining will do will allow you to detect and understand the changes that are made to your cloud environment. And then after that, we will field a couple of questions if you have some. So with that, I'm going to be jumping around to different screens. I'm also going to be using our docs. So you can follow along with me. If you go to docs.fugue.co, and if we look there, we will see our getting started portion, and we are going to be walking through the setup in the Azure portal. So I guess prior to that, if you have not gotten everything set up, you want to, if you haven't done your registration, you want to go to fugue-co/go. And this is the registration link. So that's really your first step. You want to get registered. Once you verify the account, then we'll be able to get started. I'm going to work with the assumption that everybody has verified their account so we can move forward. So once we have our account verified, we are going to log in. And once logged in, we are going to see this screen with our cloud environments. First thing, before we start to define the environment, I'll take you to the accounts page. So what we want to show here is this is really going to show you the account that you currently have set up. So right now, all of our customers are on an enterprise trial. So for the first 30 days, which means that you will have complete access to all of the features and functionality of Fugue. After that 30-day period, you will then make a decision whether you proceed and move forward with Fugue Enterprise, or what many of you will probably do is just go to Fugue Developer. The really nice thing with Fugue Developer, what we've done is we've made this essentially a free version of Fugue. So there are some limited functionality, but the things that customers really are attracted to, the visualization, being able to set up baselines and detect drift, you will absolutely be able to do that. And we will go over some of the plans and kind of hone in on that portion a little bit later. But let's dive in and define our first environment. So we are going to give our environment a name. And as you can see, Fugue is a multi-cloud solution. So AWS and Azure are your options at this time. We are going to select Azure. So when you connect to Azure, there's basically 4 pieces of information that you're going to need. And we're going to go through that whole setup portion. So we're going to need a tenant ID, subscription ID, the application ID, and the client secret. Those 4 things are necessary for us to connect to Azure. So we're going to walk through that process of getting those things. So I'm going to jump between screens. I'm going to be looking in our docs and walk through those as well. But we're going to launch into the Azure Portal and Azure Portal and grab our tenant ID. So, and we can move around, let's see, to our active. And the first thing, if we go to our Active Directory, is to grab our tenant ID. So we're going to copy that to our clipboard, paste that in here. Our subscription ID we can actually find on our main page when we log in. So our subscription ID is here. And we are going to plug that in there. So if you are following along within the docs, we are really at this top section in the connect portion. And we've gotten our tenant ID and subscription ID. The next thing we have to do is we have to create an Azure Active Directory application. We're going to register the application, and then we're going to get additional information, the client secret that we will be able to plug in so that we can connect directly. So we go to our Azure AD again. We go to app registrations, and we're actually going to create a new one. And we will call that webinar. And we're going to do Fugue only single tenant. And we have successfully created the application. And with that, we also have an application ID. And now we need to generate a secret. Before we do that, we're going to assign an RBAC role to that application. And to do that, we will go to our subscription ID. So we'll go back to our subscriptions. We're going to access control IAM, and we're going to add a role assignment. So Fugue has the ability to do auto remediation. So essentially, when we talk about baselining and auto remediation, we're able to fix configuration errors. So if someone were to make a configuration change within your environment, Fugue has the ability to codelessly auto remediate that. So we're not going to be using different serverless functions looking for different resource activity within our environments. We're able to do that in an automated fashion. For now, we're just going to add this role assignment as a reader, which will give us permission to scan. We're going to look for our app, which is, let's do that again. Okay, we have that selected member, which is webinar. We're going to save. So we've added our role assignment. We're going to go back to our app registrations. It'll come up this way. We may have to look at it this way. Here we go. And we're going to go to certificates and secrets. And we can do that. It says for our webinar secret. And we have our client secret here. I'm going to copy that. And connect to Azure. Fairly straightforward and simple. Again, referring to our docs, essentially we just followed this process. I went through it a little quickly, but obviously if you weren't able to follow along, you would be able to do that on your own. Walking through our docs, they're extremely clear and just give you step-by-step instructions. So from there, once we are connected, and this lets us know that we have successfully connected, we are going to select the resource groups within our Azure environment that we want to connect to. And essentially at the top here gives you the ability to just select all the resource groups, which we will do. Enforcement is where we start talking about baselining and auto remediation. So we're not going to do that. Again, if you'll remember, the role that we selected was only a reader role. So we only have permission to scan the environment, to see what's there. We don't have permissions to do any sort of enforcement or corrective actions. We're just going to go forward with this. So we select our resource groups. In terms of our compliance libraries, kind of referring back to our developer, when you have your Fugue developer account, the Azure Foundations Benchmarks, essentially CIS benchmarks, are what you would scan for. So that's what we're going to scan for. We hit continue. We can confirm all of our details here. We have our tenant ID, our subscription ID, the resource group names that we are going to scan for, and we hit approve and begin our initial scan. So I'm going to pause right there. Sivia, if there are any hands raised at this particular time or any questions, it would be great. We could answer some of those now. If not, I will just continue on and give you an organizational administrative overview of the Fugue dashboard.
All is clear right now. Thanks, Ricardo.
Perfect. So within the dashboard, we do have the ability to add additional users. So this is how you would go about that. Within your groups, you can select different groups to have read-only access or write access. As you can see, we have two groups here. We have an admin group, and then we have an analyst group. Our analyst group today only has access to our webinar demo environment. We are able to edit the group, and we can now say they have access to the environment that we just created, only giving them read-only access. So you have the ability to add different users within your organizations to be able to view all of your Fugue environments, or specific environments that only pertain to the resources that they are managing. In terms of adding users, once you invite the new users, you are able to add them to the different groups that you set up. So it will send an email, you will get a confirmation. They would just need to confirm their email address and they will have their Fugue access. Additionally, we also have the ability to interact with Fugue via the API. So Fugue has a full API which will allow you to perform all the actions that you see in our dashboard. So even creation of those environments, you can actually automate that. Details on the Fugue API are here. This is the UI for the Swagger docs. The nice thing about this is you can actually interact with the environment. So all the API calls that you may want to automate and perform, you can test them out here. You can see what the output looks like for each one of your for each one of the API calls to perform follow-up actions if you so desire. In terms of notifications, the way that you set that up, if you have an AWS and an Azure account, you can actually use AWS SNS topics to create it. Otherwise, you can just create a notification and have it send you an email. So you can create a notification based on a compliance violation, based on configuration drift, or if you have enforcement, any sort of those actions would trigger a notification and you would get an email alerting you to that. And last but not least, we talk about CIS benchmarks, which we have set up, and that's the compliance family that we are going to be scanning. But we also have the ability to create custom rules. So Fugue uses OPA, which is the Open Policy Agent with the underlying language of Rego. You'd be able to create multiple rules based on different instance types. If there are certain things that you want to check regarding the configuration of any of these resource types, you can create a rule. Generally, the rules are 1 or 2 lines of code, very straightforward, that would check and give you either a pass or a fail for that, that specific custom rule. So you can start adding additional custom rules as, in essence, compliance family rules, or if you have internal corporate policies, you can add those there as well. So we will go back, we'll take a look at our environment. It appears that it is completed. So one of the things on the agenda was getting a visualization. So this is a fairly small environment that I have set up in Azure, nothing too extravagant, but what you can see is based on those resource groups, we are now able to give you a network diagram of what you have. So your network configurations, name, the location, the region of the network. You see this was in Central. I have a separate Fugue Network 1 here in East US 2, and yet another network here in East US called App1 Dev. Within this environment, you see that I have multiple VMs. So you will see a number down here and an animation here that will tell you if you expand, you'll be able to see the multiple VMs. So you can imagine we have customers that have hundreds of VMs in a single VNet where they're able to basically expand out, see all the different VNets, be able to see compliance violations against those specific VMs. You can also highlight and identify which VMs are in which subnets. You can also do that with security groups as well. So if you have a specific VMs or specific storage instances that are within certain subnets, they would be highlighted there. Your storage as well is you have multiple storage buckets and you're able to see all of those with the name detail as well. You'll see a number here. So you can imagine if you have hundreds of buckets, you'll be able to see all those buckets detailed within the same visualization. Another really nice feature of Fugue is all of these scans. So anytime that Fugue performs a scan, it's captured here. So you can actually roll back. So I just launched this environment. So I only have 1 scan, obviously. But as my scans build up, as we're checking for compliance, whether be it on a daily basis or an hourly basis, you can update your scan frequency. You will be able to roll back to see how things have changed over time and to be able to see what your compliance posture was at specific times. here's where we talk about baseline. So within all of the detail here, with all of the VNet detail, the subnet security groups, all the VM details and configurations, along with the storage, everything that's in those resource groups, I can now establish a baseline. So Fugue has captured the configuration information of everything. With that, I can now establish a baseline, which I did there. The baseline can also be done in an automated fashion, so you can do that via API call as well. Once I've established that baseline, I now have a list of resources that Fugue is tracking for me. So the configuration of everything that we captured in that scan is now here as part of that baseline. And what that means is, if anything changes, if there are configuration updates or changes outside of what my normal practices are, so it could be done through the portal or even in an automated fashion, I've established a baseline so I know what my known good state is. So now I will receive an event. So there will be an alert or an event generated so that everything will be in my events tab, and that's true configuration drift. So we are now moving away from getting false positives on things that we think are wrong. Now, every time that there's a deviation from my baseline, I will get an event generated. In terms of the settings here, you are able to update the resource groups that you are tracking and scanning within Azure, which is really nice. You're also able to update your compliance library. So today we are simply checking CIS Azure Foundations, CIS benchmarks essentially, but tomorrow I may want to update this to check all the other compliance families to get a readout on where I am currently as it relates to my compliance posture with those families. With enforcement, again, something that we talked about, you would actually have to update the role permission that we created. So today, I'm only, I've set up as a reader. You would have to set that up as a contributor or some additional access to be able to actually correct that. And that's where you would be able to do enforcement. The final thing that we see on this environment settings tab is the ability to generate reports. So you would want a report generated either daily or weekly. These reports can go to really anybody within your organization, which will allow them to get a summary of the compliance posture on a daily basis. So on an ongoing basis, you will have a hard record that could be shared with teams, auditors, others that would need to see what your compliance posture was at specific dates and times. Again, all of that detail, that information is also accessible via the API. So if you needed to make an API call for a specific scan, you are able to do that as well. But this is an easy way to get a daily email report or a weekly email report. Again, that can be sent to a group address, pretty much any email address and as many email addresses as you wanted to receive that information, you are able to do that. So kind of going back to our agenda, making sure that we covered everything. So we were able to define our first Fugue environment. We did go over the dashboard. There are a couple other things on the dashboard that I will show, but we generated our visualization. We see that we scanned against CIS benchmarks, and we're also able to understand the changes. So we're able to capture all of the drift there. Within the dashboard, I do want to go to the just the compliance view, the way that is laid out. So specifically for each one of the resources that we captured in those resource groups, we're now going to scan for all of the rules, and they're actually specifically mapped to the things associated within CIS benchmarks within Azure. So that specific environment, we see that there's only one issue. We are able to click on that issue and get details. So essentially, unattached disks should be encrypted, and this ensures that its content is fully unrecoverable without a key, thus protects the volume from unwarranted reads. So we know that we have unattached volumes that are not encrypted, that those volumes could be used, could be attached to other instances, and that data access. So this is telling us that there is an unattached volume and it needs to be encrypted. So obviously something very important to security, not only just security, but compliance as well. In terms of the views, we can also view by resource type. So you'll see your resource types on the left side. We also have the ability to filter by resource type. So any of the resource types that you see here in Azure, you can filter and be able to check to see how they are by compliance. And lastly, compliance by resource. So we're able to see essentially the resource IDs that are captured within Azure. We can look at compliance based on those specific resource IDs. So if there are names for the different buckets that you have that you want to refer to, we're able to go and look at those specifically in these storage accounts. And also to see how compliant or non-compliant they are. Again, we have additional filtered by detected date. We can also filter by tags. So if you have specific tagging that you're doing throughout an entire resource group, you'll be able to grab those things as well and filter it that way. So we covered a lot, all fairly quick, but again, fairly simple. So we like to say 15 to 20 minutes, you will get connected with Fugue, be able to connect to your Azure environment, get up and running, get a visualization of your environment, as well as check compliance policy. The one thing I will direct us to here as we look into the account details, the different plans that we have. So the Fugue plans, Fugue Developer, Fugue Enterprise, this is going to give you detail of each one of the plans. Again, for the first 30 days that you have Fugue set up, you have full access. So you are actually going through with the enterprise trial. The only thing that you would not have is the ability to do single sign-on, to set that up. So that's only for our licensed enterprise customers, but everything else to include all the different compliance families, which you see here, the drift detection, auto remediation, enterprise support, and SLA, all of that's included for your first 30 days. Once you exceed that 30-day period, the resources drop to about 1,500, which is still a substantial amount. You're restricted to 5 Fugue environments, and it's only a single user sort of setup. So it's not something that you would share amongst your team. So I encourage you to take full advantage of that first 30-day period, use all the Fugue features, interact with us from a support standpoint. The support team, the SA team is also there to back up the support team and willing to help get you set up. But again, our docs are extremely comprehensive and detailed and step-by-step instructions, and you will be up and running in no time. So Drew, I didn't know if we had any questions, but I'd be happy to take them at this time. Otherwise, I thank everybody for their time.
We don't have questions, but we do have somebody online on the call. His name is Ken, and I know he's sitting there with like a bunch of questions and just feels a little nervous about asking them.
Don't be shy, Ken.
I have now unmuted Ken.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
Great, thanks for joining us, Ken. What questions do you have?
Does this, so if I were to set up a, what is the default scan time? If I set up in an environment, how often does my environment get scanned, and can I change it?
Yeah, great question. So you can change your environment, the scan interval. When you initially sign up, your scan interval is set on a 24-hour period, so essentially once per day. But you have the ability to lower that. We don't make any restrictions. The only caution that we have is depending on the size of the environment, will depend on how long the scan will take, coupled with the different compliance families that you select. So that is actually a compute process. So we generally don't have customers that lower their scan below 10 or 15 minutes, but depending on your use case, if it's strictly for security and auto remediation, you may want to tighten that. But there is no restriction. So in terms of a rule restriction as far as Fugue is concerned, It's really dependent on the environment and the use case. So you can modify that using the API.
That's great. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ken, for joining us today.
No problem. And if anyone else on the call has any further questions or requires support, feel free to send an email to support@fugue.co and I will respond.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. This was good.